My name is Eliza, and since childhood I've been used to feeling like a stranger in my own family. My twin sister, Anna, was the epitome of everything that her parents considered right and worthy. She was their golden girl, a model of virtue, the epitome of an ideal child who smiled in family photos, received praise from teachers, and wore pastel-colored dresses that emphasized her sophistication. I, on the other hand, was a dark shadow that they tried to ignore, and when that failed, they tried to fix, instruct, and remake. Our father, a professor at Stern University, lived in a world of books, lectures, and academic discussions, rarely paying attention to everyday concerns unless they concerned his reputation. He expected us to conform to certain unwritten rules of decency, and he was able to keep his outward composure, but his cold gaze was heavier than the loudest screams. Mom, on the contrary, devoted herself to home and family, but her care for us was not soft or warm. She was demanding, almost obsessive. She tried to mold us according to a pre-selected pattern, and every time I did not match, it became a personal defeat for her. For as long as I can remember, every day at home was like an endless criticism session. My clothes, my hobbies, my music, everything became the subject of discussion. Eliza, why can't you be more like your sister? This phrase was a constant refrain of her reproaches, especially when I appeared at breakfast in my favorite t-shirts with rock band logos, with headphones in my ears, deliberately shutting myself off from the outside world. Anna was the epitome of approval, smiling, courteous, always meeting expectations. I just don't understand why it's so hard for you to put on a beautiful dress and smile more, she said easily, tossing her perfectly coiffed hair over her shoulder, and in those moments I felt as if we were separated not just by upbringing, but by a whole chasm. It was Saturday, one of those days when my father organized another evening for his colleagues, and our presence was mandatory. This was not a discussed issue. We had to come to this reception pretending to be a close-knit family. As a sign of my small but principled rebellion, I chose a black turtleneck, applied thick eyeliner and put on my favorite army boots, knowing that this would cause another wave of indignation. Mom caught me on the stairs. Her gaze fell piercingly on my shoes, as if they were something unacceptable. "You're not going to go like this," she said, her voice flat but strained. I shrugged, trying to look unconcerned, even though a familiar protest was already beginning to boil in my chest. "I don't see why not." She sighed with a long, drawn-out sigh, the one that always told me that I was a disappointment, a mistake in her carefully constructed world. "Please, Eliza, just once, can't you try to fit in?" Fit in? I grinned, feeling anger rise in me. "So we can pretend we're the perfect family?" "It's not about pretending, it's about respecting your father." Her voice became sharper, as it always did when she tried to put pressure on her conscience. Anna, of course, could not resist participating in this scene. Her footsteps pounded down the corridor. Her heels beat a clear rhythm. "Mom's right, Liz. It's not that hard to look decent. Why do you always have to complicate things?" "Maybe I don't want to be your clone, Anna," I snapped, feeling the heat of anger spread across my cheeks. I hated these arguments. I hated these endless comparisons. But most of all I hated how easily they made me feel superfluous in my own family. At that moment, my father appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His cold, appraising gaze and furrowed brows said more than any words. "Eliza, change your clothes. We're leaving in 10 minutes." There was no room for objections in his tone. The disappointment in his eyes was strong enough to make me feel a pang of guilt. I didn't cry, I didn't throw tantrums, I didn't argue. I just turned around and went to my room, realizing that I had lost again. After wiping off half of my eyeliner and changing my shoes for boring shoes, I went downstairs and we went out for the evening. The car was filled with silence, diluted only by classical music, which my father turned on to create the illusion of calm. I stared out the car window, watching the trees lining the road disappear one by one into the darkness, disappearing into the indifferent evening air. At that moment, I promised myself that one day I would break out of this circle, that one day I would be able to live the way I wanted, without the dictates of other people's expectations, without eternal comparisons with Anna, without a scenario imposed on me, when my role was reduced to someone's convenience. One day I will decide what to wear, who to be friends with, what to be interested in, who to become, and no one, not my father with his stern gaze, not my mother with her icy tone, not even the perfect Anna, will be able to change that. My room was the only place in the house where I could at least for a moment forget about how my parents wanted me to be, where I didn't have to play a role that I didn't like. Unlike the sterile, featureless rooms of the rest of the house, where every object was chosen not by me, but by my mother, my room reflected my own desires, my interests, my inner world. For walls plastered with music posters, covered with sketches, and covered with lyrics, in which I found more understanding than in the voices of my family, were my only refuge, a space where I could be myself. That night, when I was trying to hide from reality by immersing myself in a playlist of my favorite bands, to detach myself from everything with the help of music, which, if only for a short time, drowned out the disappointment, my father knocked and entered my room uninvited. He stopped at the threshold, his face frozen in a familiar frown that I learned to read as a child. "Eliza, turn that noise off," he said in that flat but unquestioning voice that always meant it was pointless to argue. "Why didn't you study with Anna today? You know you both have exams coming up." I slowly pulled out one earphone, restraining my irritation, and looked at it. "I studied, just not with Anna," I replied as calmly as possible. "It's easier for me to work alone." He shook his head, clearly not believing a word I said. "You know the rules," his voice became even stricter. "Anna gets good grades, and you should do the same. I don't understand why you always complicate things." I pressed my lips together, feeling anger boil up inside, the same anger that came every time he talked to me as if I were an incorrigible defect in their perfectly thought-out plan. "It's not a complication," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I just have my own way of learning. Why do I have to follow Anna's method if it doesn't suit me?" He didn't react to my words, as if he didn't consider it necessary to discuss them. Instead, he abruptly changed the subject, uttering the following phrase, which made me cringe inwardly. "And also, your friends. I saw you with them at the cafe yesterday. I don't think they're a good influence on you." I felt irritation boiling up in me, turning into anger. "Do they have a good effect?" I asked, crossing my arms over my chest. "You should spend time with the daughters of my colleagues," he continued, not even bothering to explain what exactly was wrong with my friends. "They are a more suitable company." I could barely resist laughing at the absurdity of his words. "Suitable for what?" I said. "For you? Is it because they're talking about economics and pretending to be interested in boring university meetings?" Before Dad could answer, Mom appeared at the door, her presence immediately making the atmosphere in the room even more tense. "Eliza, your father is right," her voice was harsh, cold, and full of unquestionable confidence. "These girls come from good families, they know how to behave. These are the friends you need." I got out of bed and turned to face them, feeling that my patience was coming to an end. "And if I don't want the friends you choose for me? If I want to decide for myself who to communicate with, what to study and who to become?" There was a pause, and then Mom's voice sounded like it was putting an end to this conversation. "That's enough, Eliza. You know that your future at the university has already been determined. Your father took care of it. After graduation, you need to start thinking about settling down." I froze, not immediately understanding the meaning of her words. "Settle down?" I repeated, as if tasting the word, which turned out to be better. "You mean I have to think about getting married?" Mom didn't answer right away, but her face softened slightly, as if she was trying to explain something to me that was self-evident. "We want a better life for you, Eliza," she said at last. "Following the path that we have outlined will give you a good future." I shook my head, feeling a lump rise in my throat. A good life? I repeated with a grin. Is it a good life if it is built not on my desires, but on yours? No one answered. There was no need for that. We all knew that this conversation wouldn't change anything. They had their own plans, and like Anna, I had to comply. Anna and I have always been close, like two sides of the same coin, but despite our outward closeness, we have never been on the same wavelength. We have never fully understood each other, and over the years this gap has only widened. At the university where my father taught, our differences became not just noticeable, but glaring. Anna, an undoubted star, a diligent student of the Faculty of Business Management, who was predicted to have a bright future, always sat in the front rows of lecture halls, listened attentively to professors, nodded at the right moments, asked questions that elicited approving smiles from the teachers, and it was like I was stuck in a strange world, in a program that wasn't mine, as if I was wearing the wrong shoes, uncomfortable, out of size, alien. One afternoon, making my way through the rubble of textbooks in the library, I tried to focus on my notes, but the words in front of my eyes merged into shapeless spots, the letters jumped, the thoughts slipped away, and I was already beginning to wonder if I shouldn't just drop everything, when Anna suddenly appeared next to me, organized, collected, as always impeccable, holding in her hand neatly folded notes in his hands. Hey, Liz, are you going to the study group tonight? What is it? She asked, smiling her light but insistent smile. Professor Hall mentioned that he would stop by. It would be useful for us to show ourselves. I looked up, feeling the usual heaviness spreading in my stomach. That us always meant you should, but I just shook my head. No, I don't think so, I said, trying not to look at her. These things are really not my style. Anna frowned, and then put the books down on the table with a muffled thud, expressing disapproval even in this simple movement. It's not about this being your scene, Liz, she said, leaning on the edge of the table. The point is to make the right impression. You need to start taking this seriously. We're finishing up soon, do you even understand? I shrugged, pretending to go back to my notes, even though I knew she wouldn't back down. I take this seriously, just not the way you do. I don't want to do something just because it's expected of me. Anna sighed heavily and leaned closer, as if trying to reach me. Liz, sometimes you have to play a game to get ahead. Her voice was unexpectedly soft, but there was steel in her eyes. Do you think I like this? She waved her hand at her perfectly marked textbooks, stacks of notes organized by colors, and I suddenly wondered if she really always enjoys this life, or if she just knows how to create appearances. It's not about loving it, she continued. It's about doing what's necessary. I shook my head, pushing my chair back with a sharp crash that cut through the silence of the library. Well, maybe I'm tired of doing what everyone else thinks is necessary. Have you ever thought about it? Anna put her hands on the table and looked at me for a long, searching look. Liz, I'm just trying to keep an eye on you. Dad won't be around forever to sort things out. What are you going to do if you keep pushing everyone away? Maybe I'll figure it out myself, I retorted, feeling a surge of defiance. Maybe I don't need to follow someone else's plan. Maybe the map of my life should be drawn by me, not by my father or you. Anna sighed, her disappointment almost palpable. You're such a stubborn person, Liz. Just try it, okay? If not for yourself, then for me. Come over tonight and talk to Professor Hall. It won't kill you. I looked at her for real, seeing for the first time in a long time not just my annoyingly perfect sister, but someone who might care about me in her own way. Okay, I'll think about it, I finally replied, not wanting to promise more than I could fulfill. Anna smiled, relaxing, and nodded. Thanks. You might even enjoy it if you give it a chance. I doubt it, I muttered, but deep down I knew that this round was hers. I will go. I'll sit out a boring discussion. I nod at the right moments. It's only a few hours. What could possibly go wrong? As it turned out, it's not so bad. Professor Hall turned out to be surprisingly interesting when he wasn't standing at the lectern. At one point, I even asked a question that made Anna give me a shocked but pleased look. Later, when we were walking back to the dorm, she playfully nudged me. "See? It's not that terrible, right?" I rolled my eyes, but I smiled out of the corner of my lips. "Maybe," I admitted, though I would never have said it out loud. This fragile harmony, however, did not last long. In our last year, Anna announced that she was getting married, introducing us to her fiancé, a lawyer who was 10 years older than her, had already built a successful career and fully met the expectations of our parents. He was exactly what they dreamed of: respected, serious, stable. I watched as she introduced him to my father, as he discreetly shook his hand, and my mother clasped her hands and gave Anna a look that looked like triumph. At that moment, I realized that everything was going according to their script. Her path was painted down to the smallest detail, and no one even asked if she was happy. I stood to the side, feeling something hot and heavy rising in my chest, something I couldn't put into words. Mom and Dad were over the moon, praising Anna for her good choice, as if she had won some kind of grand prize that confirmed her status as an ideal daughter who had fulfilled the expectations of the family. They enjoyed discussing future prospects, talking about her husband's prestigious acquaintances, his excellent position, and the possibility of an ideal family life where everything is subordinated to reason, stability, and public approval. And, of course, at that moment, their gazes slowly but inevitably slid in my direction, full of expectation, almost reproachful, as if reminding me, "Your turn. Eliza, now it's your turn to find someone suitable," my father said at dinner, his voice flat, but there was a clear message in it. Time is passing, and I'm still not moving anywhere. My mother took up his words with her usual enthusiasm, already imagining her new creation, like another family project in which my fate was as plausible an element as choosing furniture or making a menu for another dinner party. "Think about your future, dear," she said, her tone gentle but leaving no room for argument. "Someone who can provide for you, who has a good position. It is important." I stared at my plate, feeling as if the walls of the room were shrinking, making me suffocate. Their voices grew fainter and fainter, becoming the background, almost white noise, because only one thought was already buzzing in my head: I need to get out. Anna's wedding was planned by her mother down to the last detail, from the perfectly matched bridesmaids' dresses, matching the tone of the room's decoration, to carefully selected floral arrangements, each of which was the epitome of impeccable taste and family prestige. Anna dutifully followed the scenario, without asking questions, without objecting, and perhaps it made sense in her world, but watching how her mother continued to guide her life after the wedding, visiting her regularly, giving advice, controlling even the smallest things, I realized one thing: I don't want anyone to. Someone else was shaping my fate like a designer, leaving me no choice. That's exactly what I was thinking as I walked down the street that evening, thinking about how to break out of this circle, how to escape the life my parents had drawn for me, when suddenly I heard the low, powerful rumble of an approaching motorcycle. The sound immediately caught my attention, making me turn around, and then I saw him, Jake, in a leather jacket, with a carefree smile, the one that belongs to people who know what it's like to live without chains. "It looks like you need company," he shouted over the roar of the engine, his eyes sparkling with a cheerful twinkle in which there was something defiantly attractive. I froze, looking back to where my house was at the end of the street, my usual path, my predictable life, and then I looked at him again, at his outstretched hand, at this call to something completely different, unknown, but so tempting. What could I have lost? "Sure, why not?" I replied. My voice trembled, mixing fear, anticipation, and something else, not fully realized. I climbed into the back seat of his motorcycle, and as soon as I felt the engine shudder under us, as we took off, as the wind tore my hair back, as the city began to dissolve behind me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: freedom. Jake shouted something, laughing, talking about showing me his world, and I just wrapped my arms tighter around his waist, not wanting this moment to end. We stopped at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a place where bikers, workers, and people who didn't fit into the sterile, immaculate world I grew up in gathered. We ate burgers, washed them down with soda, and chatted about everything, and he talked about his life, how he works as a welder, how he loves the road, how he dreams of driving across the country without a plan, just following the horizon. Isn't it scary to live like this, without a clear route? I asked, my voice barely audible over the noise of conversations, the clink of plates, and the laughter of people around me. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. Scared? No. Excitingly. You never know what's waiting for you around the corner. Isn't it better than living according to someone's pre-written script? I looked at him, listened to him, and there was something in his words that resonated in me so strongly that it took me a moment to realize how my heart was beating faster. So the weeks passed. We used to meet in secret, and every time I got on his bike, when we raced along the roads at night, when he showed me places I didn't know about, when he taught me to really laugh, I felt like I was becoming different, like something was changing in me, like this life, his life, becomes mine, too. It wasn't just excitement. It was a feeling of life. A sense of freedom. One evening we were sitting on a hilltop, watching the sun sink below the horizon, leaving scarlet streaks of fire in the sky. Jake turned to me, his gaze serious, not at all what he usually was. Eliza, I'm not just going to escape, he said softly. I'm going to feel alive. To know that every moment, every day is worth something. Especially if it's spent with you. I looked at him, and something tightened in my chest, and then unfurled like a sail in the wind. I leaned closer, feeling my heart beating a crazy rhythm. I've never felt like this before. You make me feel free, Jake, I whispered, feeling something inexplicable flare up inside, aching, hot, frightening and delicious at the same time. He smiled, pulling me closer, his hands warm, firm, confident. Then let's not go back to a simple existence. His voice was full of some kind of quiet but unbending promise. Let's live. 6 months with Jake flew by like a lifetime, filled with moments that I had only dreamed of before. We drove along the highway, without a plan, without reference, living in the present, not thinking about what would happen tomorrow. I knew that this day would come sooner or later, that he would propose somewhere under the stars, with the gentle hum of his motorcycle in the background, and when it happened, my heart screamed, yes, before I could utter a single word. Everything was perfect, except for one thing. I knew that an impending obstacle awaited us, an impregnable wall built of condemnation, expectations, and other people's plans. My parents didn't need to know Jake to reject him outright. He was the epitome of everything they despised: rough features, tattoos, freedom in his gaze, indomitable spirit, a life in which there was no place for academic regalia and high society. But I couldn't hide anymore, couldn't pretend that my life was still governed by their rules. I've made up my mind. As Jake and I walked up the driveway, I could already feel the weight of unspoken condemnation hanging over the house like a thundercloud. He was dressed as he always was, a leather jacket, a dark t-shirt, faded jeans, and a bandana tied around his wrist. That was my Jake. The one who wasn't pretending. Someone who hasn't played social games. As soon as we entered, Mom looked at him, turned pale, her eyes widened in shock, as if indecency itself had just burst into the house. What a world, Eliza, she gasped, barely catching her breath, her voice more a whisper than a reproach. My father was sharper. He gave Jake an appraising look, cold as a knife blade, and his voice sounded like a blow. Who is this, and why is he dressed like this while in our house? I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding in my chest. Mom, Dad, this is Jake. I looked at them without looking away. He's the man I love. We're getting married. In the silence that followed, one could hear the ticking of the wall clock. His father turned slowly to Jake, and there was nothing but cold contempt in his eyes. Married, then? His tone was icy. And what do you do for a living, young man? What are your qualifications? Jake, bless him, didn't even blink. He met my father's gaze directly, calmly, without challenge, but also without fear. I'm a welder, he said with his usual bluntness. After school, I took several specialized courses. I work at a factory. I earn honest work. Mom gasped as if she had heard the scariest confession of her life, and an expression of deep disgust appeared on her father's face. A welder? He repeated it slowly, savoring the word as if it were dirt on his tongue. Eliza, you can't be serious. Anger flared up in me instantly, hotly, irreversibly. Do you expect me to give up my happiness because he doesn't wear suits and doesn't sit in an office? It's not just a matter of costumes, Eliza, Mom spoke up, her voice trembling. This is a matter for the future. You're throwing it away for this. For the sake of the man who makes me happy, I said, feeling my feet firmly planted on the ground. Isn't that what's supposed to matter? The life you're going to lead, Mom continued, her voice pleading, is going to be full of difficulties, hardships, and instability. Don't you understand? But this life will be mine, I snapped, and for the first time in my life, I felt like my voice sounded as confident as theirs. My father shook his head, his face set in stone. We cannot and will not support this. If you choose him, don't expect to remain a part of this family. These words, spoken in an even, almost businesslike tone, hit me harder than the scream. I felt Jake squeeze my hand, and this simple gesture gave me the strength to do what I should have done a long time ago. Then I'll choose Jake, I said, peering into my parents' faces. I choose us. I choose my happiness. My mother put her hand over her mouth, tears glistened in her eyes, but my father did not flinch, his condemnation was adamant. If you leave with him, his voice was as cold as ice, don't you dare come back. I didn't say a word. I just turned around and left. I didn't know if this pain tearing me apart from the inside was saying goodbye to the past or the birth of something new, but when I took a step outside the house, I realized that there was no way back. The night air was different. Fresh. Clean. I inhaled it deeply, taking a step forward with each breath. We drove in silence, only the steady roar of the motorcycle beneath us reminded me that the world around us continued to move, that the road ahead was endless, that every kilometer we took me away from the past and brought me closer to a new life, a life where I myself wrote its rules. I hugged Jake tighter, feeling the warmth of his body through the leather jacket, absorbing his strength, his confidence, his freedom. When he finally turned off the road and stopped the motorcycle at a small diner on the outskirts of town, I took a deep breath, trying to sort out the thoughts that were spinning chaotically in my head, colliding with each other, forming endless questions to which there were no simple answers. Jake turned off the engine and turned to me, his face serious, but there was something more in his eyes, something that made me hold my breath. Are you sure about this, Eliza? What is it? He asked, his voice flat, but there was tension in it, as if he was giving me one last chance to think about everything, to turn back, to abandon what we were going to do. I mean, are you really sure? There's no turning back after tonight. I looked into his eyes, those dark, fiery eyes that promised me the life I'd always dreamed of, a life where there was no room for other people's expectations, where I could be myself, and nodded, squeezing his hand tightly. I've never been so sure of anything, I whispered. Being with you feels right. It seems like something I should do. He smiled with that carefree, charming smile that made my heart ache, the smile that had captivated me from the very first day. Okay, then let's do it, he said. Let's start our life together. It was warm inside the diner, and the air was filled with the smells of freshly brewed coffee and toasted burgers. We chose a quiet booth in the corner where no one would disturb us, and after a few minutes 2 cups of coffee appeared in front of us. The waitress brought them without asking, apparently recognizing Jake as a regular. I cupped the hot mug in my hands, watching as the cream smoothly dissolved into the black liquid, creating slow, lazy swirls. "So, what's first?" I asked, breaking the silence, trying to sort out the chaos in my head. Jake leaned back, crossed his arms over his chest, and thought for a moment before answering. "We need to find a place to stay at least for a while, and then maybe start looking for a job. I have friends who can help." His voice was calm and practical, but I saw optimism in him, faith in us, faith that we could handle it. "It's going to be hard, isn't it?" I said, more asserting than asking. Reality began to settle, gradually replacing the euphoria of escape. Jake reached across the table, his warm hand covering mine, his fingers gently squeezing mine. "Maybe," he admitted. "But we can handle it. Together." He tilted his head slightly, his eyes flashing with a familiar challenge. "Difficulties are not new to any of us, right?" I couldn't help but laugh, a short, sharp burst of real fun, because he was right, because my whole life up to this point had been a struggle. We spent several hours in that diner, talking, dreaming, making plans, and from time to time Jake would come up with ideas that seemed so wild, so daring, that my heart skipped a beat. "Maybe one day, when we have enough money, we will go on a trip around the country. Just you, me, and the open road." I allowed myself to dream. "I like it," I confessed, smiling at him. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind of action. We found a small apartment on the outskirts of the city, nothing special, but it was our place, our corner in this world. Jake got a job at a local garage, and I found a part-time job at a nearby diner, and even though life wasn't easy, there was something about it that made it real. Every evening, when we returned home to each other, when I fell asleep next to him, feeling his breath on my skin, I knew that we had everything we needed. A few months later, when we started settling in, getting used to our daily routine, Jake proposed to me, and we decided it was time to officially connect our lives. We arranged a small, cozy ceremony, simple, without unnecessary pomp, without hundreds of guests, only the closest, only those who were really with us. Until the last moment, I hoped that my family would come, that my mother would relent, that my father would at least try to understand, that they would see how happy I was, that they would understand that their fears were in vain. But the chairs reserved for them remained empty. No congratulatory messages. No phone calls. And despite the pain that gripped my heart at that moment, despite the lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow, I knew that this day was perfect anyway, because it was ours. Over time, I found something that had never been in my home: warmth, support, acceptance. Jake's mom welcomed me with open arms, calling me her daughter, and in her simple, warm words there was more love than in all the speeches of my parents in my entire life. She filled in the gaps my own family had left in me, and her warmth healed the wounds inflicted by their rejection. Finally, things are working out with Jake. After he completed additional training in underwater diving and became a certified underwater welder, his income grew to $150,000 per year, which gave us a whole new level of stability that we had never even dared to dream of before. We were able to buy a townhouse in a nice neighborhood, a place I'd only dreamed of, but never thought I'd actually live there. A spacious kitchen with a large window overlooking the garden, a cozy living room filled with light, a bedroom with a balcony where you could drink coffee in the morning wrapped in a warm blanket, and finally a separate garage for Jake's motorcycle. All this seemed so real, so deserved after all the trials through which we walked together. I also found myself in a new business. I started working as a dispatcher in Jake's company, coordinating his team, helping to set work schedules, monitor orders, and plan logistics. It wasn't just a job. I felt like I was part of something important. I felt like I was contributing not only to our family budget, but also to the very essence of our lives, supporting the man I loved and building our future together. But even despite our new employment, we did not forget about what really brought us joy. On weekends, as soon as we had some free time, we would escape the city, racing Jake's motorcycle along the winding roads, enjoying the wind, the sun, and the endless green landscapes that stretched beyond the horizon. Those moments when I snuggled up to him, feeling the warmth of his body through my jacket, when my hair was blowing in the oncoming stream of air, when there was nothing but the road and the sky ahead, were pure bliss, a sense of freedom, for which it was worth going all this way. My mother-in-law, who lived nearby, became a frequent visitor to our house, sometimes coming with homemade cakes, sometimes just to check on us, because she really considered me a daughter, and every day I realized more and more that I had found in her the support that I could not get from my family. One of those days, when Jake was tinkering in the garage and I was making coffee, she came in with an anxious expression on her face. "There's some unpleasant news," she said, sitting down at the kitchen table, her fingers trembling slightly as she straightened her napkin. "Is something wrong?" I asked, putting a cup of hot drink in front of her. "It was on the radio." She paused, as if she didn't know how best to convey the information. "A scandal has broken out at the university. They are talking about a professor who is accused of harassment." I felt something cold slide down my back. Did they give you a name?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. My mother-in-law shook her head. "No, but you know how it is. It's probably already on all the news channels." I nodded, feeling anxiety flare up inside, and reached for the remote with trembling fingers. A click. A familiar university building appeared on the screen. The host spoke in a smooth, official voice, choosing his words carefully, but there was something tense in his tone, something that made my mouth go dry. "Today, Stern University is at the center of a major scandal. One of the respected professors has been accused of inappropriate behavior towards a female student. According to preliminary data, the investigation has already begun." I stared, and almost soundlessly, as if someone had pushed all the air out of my chest, I whispered. "No," I said. And then the camera switched and I saw him. My father. His face, which I knew so well, now looked different, taut, sullen, compressed lips, tense jawline. He looked as if he was trapped in a trap from which there was no way out. I couldn't listen any further. Turning off the TV, I sat down heavily on a chair, feeling my thoughts flying in all directions, as it became difficult for me to breathe, as if the walls of the room were moving closer. At that moment, Jake came into the kitchen, wiping his hands with a rag. When he saw my face, he was instantly alert. "What's wrong, baby?" His voice was soft, but I could hear the worry in it. I swallowed hard, the words coming out with difficulty, as if I was trying to say something incredible. "This is my father," I finally gasped. "He is accused of stalking a student." For a moment, Jake's expression hardened, his brows furrowed, his lips pursed, but then he quickly came over to me, sat down next to me, and took my hand. "I'm sorry, Eliza," he said softly, his warm fingers squeezing my palm, as if preventing me from falling into the abyss of thoughts. "This is hard news. How are you going to handle this?" I shook my head, not knowing what to say. "At the moment, I'm not sure of anything. I don't know. I mean, what can I even do? We haven't been close for a long time." Jake gently squeezed my hand even tighter, as if to remind me that he was there, that I wasn't alone. "Whatever you need, I'm here for you," he said. "We don't need to figure everything out right now." I took a deep breath, trying to put my scattered thoughts together, realizing that no matter how difficult it was, I would have to face the situation face to face. I decided to wait and see how things would develop before taking any steps. No matter what decision I made, I knew Jake would be there for me. And that was the only confidence I needed right now to face whatever happened. The rest of my life was peaceful, filled with simple joys, quiet evenings in our house, endless trips along the highways, the taste of coffee in the morning, laughter, lightness, and the feeling that everything was going the way it should be. But one day this peace was disturbed, and it happened on a day that started quite normally. I was at work, checking shift schedules and answering calls, when something flashed past the window that made me freeze. A familiar car slowly pulled into the parking lot, and I felt my heart stop for a moment, and then sink somewhere down. I haven't seen my parents since the evening I left home, and to be honest, I've long since buried the hope that they would ever appear in my life, and I certainly didn't expect them to come like this, without warning, without a call, without asking for a meeting. They just arrived. When they got out of the car, I saw that they had changed dramatically, and this sight caused me feelings that I could not immediately name. The scandal I learned about from the news clearly left its mark on them. My mother looked haggard, lost a lot of weight. The wrinkles that once only appeared at the corners of her lips now cut deeply into her face, giving her a tired and aged look. And my father, the same strict, unshakable man whose the voice always sounded like a sentence, now it looked broken. His back, which had been so straight before, seemed bent under an invisible weight. But even seeing them like this, I didn't feel relieved. I didn't feel satisfied. Just a strange, nagging pain in his chest and emptiness. Mom noticed me first and immediately rushed forward. Her eyes lit up with desperate hope, and before I could react, she held out her arms to me, as if hoping that I would respond in kind, as if she believed that years of separation, misunderstanding, pain, and condemnation could be overcome in an instant, with one gesture, one hug. But I couldn't. I stepped back. My hand automatically found Jake's, and when he squeezed my fingers, his presence gave me the strength not to flinch, not to succumb to a sudden gust of weakness. "Eliza, it was so hard to find you." My mother's voice was trembling with emotion, tears shone in her eyes. Her father, unlike her, wasn't going to waste time on sentimentality. He, as before, was sharp, straightforward. His voice sounded harsh, with notes of bitterness and irritation. "I've been wrongly accused, you know," he said, clenching his fists. "I tried to ask your sister's husband for help, but this bloodsucker only wanted money. Anna persuaded him to refuse, and now they have kicked us out." I looked at them, and at the same time, disbelief, anger, pity, and some kind of incomprehensible, bitter disappointment rose in me. "We need your help," Mom continued, her voice low but desperate. "We have nowhere else to go." These words sounded like they were helpless, and maybe they were, but they forgot one important thing. Once I had no choice either, and then they just abandoned me. "Help?" I asked, feeling something crack deep inside me, opening an old wound. "After all these years, you just come to me and demand help?" "We have nowhere else to go," Mom repeated, her voice cracking. "We were thinking, maybe we could stay with you." I almost laughed at the absurdity of this request. "Stay with us?" I echoed, feeling a hollow laugh rise in my chest. "After you cut me out of your life? After you made it clear that I'm no longer your daughter?" My father's face turned red, and despite his weakness, for a moment he became the same person I remembered him as a child, strict, unyielding, confident that everyone owed him. "You owe us, Eliza," he snapped, and in that voice he could hear all his pent-up anger, all his frustration. "After all we've done for you." I felt Jake's grip on my arm tighten, supporting me, giving me strength. "That's what you're wrong about." I looked my father straight in the eye, and my voice was firm and calm. "I don't owe you anything. You chose your pride over me, you sent me away because I didn't want to obey your demands, and now that it's convenient for you, you just want to come back and pretend that we're a family?" I saw people start to stop around us, watching this scene. I saw my mother start to tremble. Her shoulders were shaking, she was crying, sobs were bursting out of her chest, attracting even more attention. "You're ungrateful," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "After all we've done for you." I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, allowing myself to feel the full weight of this moment, and then said something that should have been said a long time ago. "No, Mom. I'm not ungrateful. I'm free. I'm happy. You've made your choice, and now you have to live with it." I turned around, feeling relief spreading inside me, mixed with inescapable pain, and heard my father shout something after me, but I was no longer listening. I did not turn around. Jake leaned over to me and said softly to the guards, "Don't let them come here again." The following months flew by in silence, filled with love and peace, and when Jake and I welcomed our son into this world, I realized that this was really a new beginning for our family, a family that I had chosen myself, a family that did not require meeting anyone's expectations, but accepted me for who I was. There is. My parents never came back. That day in the parking lot was the last time I saw them. And even though a part of me grieved for what could have been, I knew that I had made the right choice, for myself, for my husband, for my child. I was finally living my life.